And welcome to another episode of Patriots 4th and 2. I'm your host, Derek Havens. Joining me as always is Mr. Steve Balestrieri. Today, we are joined by Boston Globe's Christopher Price. Been a friend, at least on Twitter anyways, for a long time. One of the most respected guys in the media. So happy to have him on. Chris, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure, guys. I include on my resume proudly that I was a blogger way back in the early days of the 21st century for PatsFans.com. And so it's nice to be able to kind of circle back around a little bit and connect.
Now you're coming home, Chris.
I love it. I love it.
Shout out to Ian Logue. Appreciate everyone who's tuning in live. Checks out PatsFans.com. I appreciate it. Again, please subscribe to us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Like, share, leave us a review. Wherever you download your podcast, keep us high in the podcast ranking so other Patriots fans can find us. All right, Chris. Well, look, we're gonna go in a bunch of different directions here in 30 minutes. So let's be as precise as we can. We got to start with the draft. I didn't get to talk to you before the draft, so just tell me, what were your thoughts on the Patriots' Drake May selection? Were you in favor of the prospect? And how do you think the offseason has gone for them so far?
I think if I had my druthers between the two, I would have been after Jaden Daniels. Okay. I was more of a Jaden Daniels guy. I went to see him at his pro day at LSU. I was smitten. I was convinced. I remain convinced that he's a special player who is on the runway. He may not be great this year, but I think eventually he's going to be great. He needs to kind of square away a few things, namely, in the words of our friend Julian Edelman, he's got to know when the journey is over and get out of bounds or slide or whatever the case may be. But look, I think Drake May is a great pick at number 3. I think this is a very unique quarterback draft, and I think Drake May is the guy. Drake May is going to be the guy for them moving forward. I think he makes a lot of sense. He does need to clean up a few things, again, like any rookie quarterback, but he is the best pick for that situation. I think that the 2 wide receivers have a chance to be very, very good in this offense. The only thing that I questioned was I think they were a little late to the party when it came to the tackle spot. There was that run on tackles right before they took Wallace, and I think they may have missed out on 1 or 2 of the guys that they might have preferred over Wallace. That being said, I like Wallace a lot. I think he projects to be a good tackle, a guy who can contribute relatively quickly over the course of his NFL career. And the last guy who I love, and I've gotten into all sorts of arguments about this so far, the pick of Milton in the 6th round, I think is fantastic. I love
that. I love that because there's been a couple of guests we've had on.
Oh, did we lose Derek?
I think we lost. There we go.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Oh, sorry, I lost you. So, no, I was going to say it's funny to hear you say that. I'm excited to hear you say that and explain why, because the last couple of guests we've had on have said that that's been their least favorite pick. So
he's the most fascinating prospect that they took. I think that you kind of know what you're going to get with all the rest of the guys. I think Milton, the boom bust potential there is endless with him, but at the same time, in the 6th round, why not? A guy with a colossal arm, you take him and he's a developmental guy for a year. I think that there's a couple of paths forward, and I think some of it depends on what happens with the older quarterbacks on the roster. Jacoby Brissett, I'm going to assume, is going to be the number 1, and then you're going to kind of, if Bailey Zappi ends up hanging around, maybe Joe Milton gets the Foxborough flu for a year. And, they tell him to go be a developmental guy, go work on your short and intermediate stuff. But the potential there for him is off the charts. I think he's a fantastic prospect. I think he's got a great arm. I have never seen a guy other than Jeff Demps. Remember the name? There's an old-timey name for you. Other than Jeff Demps,
Florida running back,
exactly.
The track guy,
when you look at a guy from a pure, tools perspective, Jeff Demps had incredible speed. Joe Milton's got an incredible arm. And I love the idea of just taking a flyer on him and seeing why not. If nothing happens, if it didn't click with him, fine, you move on. But it's a 6th round pick. So I do. Well, I like for the most part. I like the draft. Ultimately, answer your question.
Yeah, no, I think Elliott comes. I mean, the Packers have a pretty well known versed on how they draft, but like one of the schools of thought from the old school Packers, where Ron Wolf came from, Elliot's father, right? Like, it's if you're going to take a player on day 3, they need to have one elite trait. And Joe Milton's trait is elite arm strength. Like, if you're going to take a guy like Jaheim Bell, I think is a really fun draft pick in the 7th round, good value. A lot of people thought he was going to go early day 3, a lot of versatility, but like he has a very unique size, speed, agility, profile, where like Joe Milton's like, he's got like the Bazooka Joe name, like that's where it comes from, right? So like that'll be really fun. But like that's where Elliot Wolf kind of came from. Like, hey, if you're gonna take a guy on day 3, make sure that he does something exceptional. Everything else, there's a reason he's going to be there in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. But you need to make sure that he has one thing that's elite, and that's what's exciting about Joe.
Yeah, I do. I think that makes perfect sense, and I think that's a great way to describe it. You need to, if you're going to go for a guy on the 3rd day, he needs to be able to do at least one thing really well.
Yep.
And I think Joe Milton has phenomenal arm strength. I'm fascinated. I just want to see him in training camp throw an orange over the field house. Just stuff like that. Just weird, fun.
He just might.
And look, he's a bit of a sideshow. I understand that, and I think that. I don't want to say he might be okay with that, at least for now. The other thing, too, is you can do you might be able to, and I know we're kind of going over Malik Cunningham territory here, but if he makes the team, if he makes the final 53, you can do a few things with him. He's a bit of a gadget guy. He rushed for almost 300 yards last year. You can put him in some different situations if he can handle them. And I think Alex Van Pelt is smart enough to kind of, approach it with an outside-the-box mentality. So I think overall, the offseason's been good. I think I would have liked to have seen a bigger receiver. I would have liked to have seen one big receiver, and they made a bid for Calvin Ridley, and they came up short. So they were part of the conversation. The other thing, too, and we can get into this more, look, I like what they did at tackle. And I like some of their tackle options. I feel like they maybe missed out either in free agency or in the draft on a really elite left tackle. So I think for the most part, it's been a good offseason. They failed to get, they failed to get a few pieces here and there, but I'm going to be fascinated to see, maybe because of positional battles or some late free agent signings, what could ultimately bubble up.
So I want to I'll flip it to Steve in a second here, but I'll say this. I went into the offseason thinking, okay, hey, look, they've been really transparent about what they want to do. It was quarterback, receiver, tackle. They pretty much said it from the jump. I didn't expect them to be able to fill all 3 holes totally successfully in one offseason. I think that is just a little too lofty. They still have a little over $50 million in cap, but people forget they did still try to get Calvin Ridley, and it didn't work out, and they felt like they put a good number on the table, and they were kind of outbet. It is what it is. Like, they didn't want to overextend themselves, but like they've still made a lot of good moves, and I feel pretty confident, feeling like the moves they made, they still would have still made if Calvin Ridley had gone through. I don't think it was like a money issue. I just think they're trying to allocate their dollars differently. I'll tell you right now, Christopher, right now, May 24th, 2024, they are drafting a left tackle in the top 10 next year. It is a fait accompli. Okay, because there's 4 really good ones coming out as of now. We'll see what it looks like next year. They are drafting a left tackle next year. It's a done. It's a done.
Yeah. They need to. I agree with you completely. I think that, look, and I've said this before, and we could talk about this too. I have no qualms about where this team is headed defensively. Mm-hmm. I think defensively, this team can be really good this year. Again, obviously, if the core guys stay healthy, but they can be really good. All the questions are on offense. Whether it's wide receiver depth, whether it's, tackle depth, or I also think, too, they're a little thin at running back right now. There's going to be a lot of Ramondre shoulders, and there should be a lot of Ramondre shoulders. But I just, there's still some questions. There's still a lot of questions on the offensive side of the ball as a whole.
Yeah, that UDFA, was it Deshaun Fenwick, Steve? Who was that?
Yeah.
Who I kind of liked? I kind of liked him. I feel like he could be a sneaky candidate to make the roster. That's my early bet. Steve, where do you want to go next? I'll flip it over to you.
Well, real quick, one more thing about the draft, and then we can move on because I know we wanted to talk about some other stuff. Being a South Carolina fan, of course, I love the pick.
Marcus Dial, I know.
He's got, and I told Derek, I was like, what? It wouldn't surprise me if somewhere down the road they switch him to free safety. He's got the length, he's got the speed, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this guy.
Yeah, I like him, and this is something that I've talked about on my podcast with Chris Hogan, that I think right now his best path forward, because they are so deep in the secondary, his path forward when it comes to 2024 is special teams.
Absolutely.
Is to use that size and speed on special teams to be able to make a difference, to be able to be disruptive, and then you kind of go from there. Because look, the one defensive guy that they took in the draft, it's an uphill battle for him. Mm-hmm. It is. I'm not dismissing him out of hand, but some stuff needs to happen for him to be able to get on the field and see significant defensive snaps in 2024. So I think if he shows up on special teams, that's a great start. And I think he needs to continue to build from there. But yeah, I like the pick. I do. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how he competes on a roster filled with defensive playmakers. Yeah. I think it's going to be a real challenge. But from looking at his college stuff and from talking to guys like you, I think he's got a good foothold.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, Derek, let's flip this over now. And
Chris, you wrote a great article about Calvin Anderson, and I don't know if everyone in our audience has had the time to read it, but I would love for you to kind of give your insight on the article itself, like a brief overview, and kind of how you kind of came across that.
It was a blast to do. It was amazing. I've never had a story like this. First of all, thank you for saying those nice words.
Of course.
He talked with us in August of last year, late August of last year, when he returned from whatever it was at the time. We didn't know what he had. And he said, I'm not ready to tell my story yet, but down the road, I'll tell my story and it's going to be beautiful. And so that intrigued me instantly as a journalist. And so I said, all right, I circled back around once we were all done with him as reporters. And I said, look, if you ever want to tell your story, I gave my card. I said, let me know.
Great move by you.
Yeah. I said, I just, what is it? They say, shoot your shot, right?
Sure.
It's just, I gave him my card and I said, look, I work at the Boston Globe. We got a lot of different people at our disposal. We can tell the story in a way that maybe some other places can't. And then at the same time, I also said, look, ask around about me. This is my 20th year covering the team. Ask some of your teammates, ask some guys that I've written about. Talk to Stacey James, who's head of PR, and kind of vouch, have them vouch for me. And he did. And he basically said, okay, you're legit. And so we talked and talked and talked. And the real work on the story kind of went from maybe February to March to April, where I have, I think on my other computer here, I have about 7 hours of Zoom conversations that I had with him and his wife. And it just kind of built from there, telling me about his bout with malaria and about how he was 50-50. And he showed me videos of him, his wife took of him in the hospital. And when you do a story like that, you just want to do justice to the story, but you also want to tell it in a way that serves the subject, at least as far as I'm concerned, and to be able to have it all executed the way I think it should be executed, I think was great. Because you guys know this too, when you sit down at a computer, writing is a very solitary activity. It's just you. And for me to be able to depend on the people that I work with, the photographers, the video people, the editors, all of it, and to have it all come together that way, it was great. There was some anxiety at the end. I was worried that someone like Adam Schefter was going to get his hands on it surreptitiously, and it was gonna all blow up in my face.
He has plenty of ties in that building.
Yeah, I mean, I've never worked on a story like that for that long. Obviously, I've done books that have taken years and. It's been a multi-layered process, but I literally there were like 4 or 5 other people outside my own house who knew that this story was going on and what I was doing. And Yeah, it took the whole thing took 8 months really from start to finish, but it was amazing.
Wow.
It was a gift. It was a gift that was given to me by fate, the gods, whatever. And it was up to me to execute it. And I pray that I was able to execute it properly, and it all kind of came together very nicely.
Well, you did, and I don't want to just kiss your ass, but just because you're on the podcast, but you did a great job. It was honest.
Thank you.
It was awesome,
Derek. Guys, I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
no,
I mean,
it's cool
when you're talking like malaria is no joke. I mean, you and I talked offline, Chris, and I mean to be able to come back in such a short amount of time as he did, that to me was absolutely amazing. And the one thing that stuck out in your story, and then you were talking about it on Twitter, and I think it rang so true, especially to myself, when you said, if wherever you go in life, find someone that talks about you like they talk about each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they seem like a solid couple.
Yeah. they really are. And I've had this conversation a couple of times with other athletes, and I always kind of go back to it in situations like this. Sometimes athletes need to be saved from themselves.
100%.
Because the focus is just straight ahead all the time. And they were in late July, and you're a football player in late July, the focus is training camp, and the focus is getting ready, and the focus for him was validation in the contract that he signed with Bill Belichick. This is an undrafted guy, in signing a multi-million-dollar contract to play for the greatest coach in history of football. This was a big thing for him to be able to show that he was worth it. He proved his worth, and there was a tremendous sense of guilt for him when he couldn't get on the field, and that was very difficult to deal with. And it was fascinating because we touched on some mental health aspects throughout the story. It was really interesting to hear how he dealt with that, and how he, by his own admission, a lot of times didn't deal with it really well. But I think that he's learned from it. His wife, Sheree, they've learned from it as a couple. And again, to Steve's point, man, you just, and it goes beyond sports. You just, when you get a partner like that, it can be everything for you.
100%. And Steve and I have been around the team quite a bit. Maybe certainly not as long as you have, and you're not there day to day, but like, man, there are those stories where they really kind of humble the person who's telling it, and the person you're like, as a journalist, you're like, oh wow, like this is like this, because you look at it and say like, hey, Calvin Anderson, it could be a swing tackle. If you go back to like last year, it could be a swing tackle. We'll see how he contributes. Like, but then he goes out there, and I personally, I'm not even afraid to say it, I was beating him up over his performance. I'm like, what is this? This guy is getting his ass kicked. And then you hear about some of that behind the scenes stuff, and you're like, holy shit, like this guy was going through like a life and death battle. Bill Belichick didn't even want him to get on the field. And he was like, I need to do this because this is what I want to do. And he's going through all this stuff, which is life-changing. Yeah.
He led the team in snaps the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
Which unbelievable.
Is still, I mean, given, and then they got to a point, and I say this in the story, I mean, they got to the point where it's just, he had nothing. His legs were rubbery, and he was just like, look, this is not, right now, this is not working. And so we got to figure something out moving forward. So, it was amazing. It really was. And you guys know, I mean, it's rare to be able to find a subject as a writer who is willing to open up, and you kind of have to work and work and work and work and work, and to gain trust and respect and all of that. And I owe him so much, because he looked at me, and he could have gone to ESPN, could have gone to anyone else, he could have gone to anyone else, but it's just like, look, let's create something here. And I think one of the things that helped us was that we both spoke the language of partnership, being in partnership with each other. That this was as much, this was more about him than me, but I'm just a vessel to kind of tell the story. So it was a remarkable experience. It really was. I've been lucky enough to work on a lot of really great different projects, but this was really a remarkable experience. The setup now is that if he plays well this year, there's another chapter to his story, and he's just a fascinating guy. And I hope you guys get a chance to, I know you guys come down during training camp. I hope you guys get a chance to talk to him. just kind of get a sense of who he is and get more of an understanding as to what he's been through, because he's got a remarkable story. He's a great guy.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, seriously, I appreciate you sharing that kind of backstory with us. Pretty great. Let's switch gears a little bit, and this is a little off script. Okay, I won't hold you to the fire too much because but Steve will tell you I always ask a couple off cuff questions. Okay, and this isn't necessarily scheduled, so you just tell me how you feel. Give me your favorite and your least favorite move of the offseason to this point.
My favorite move of the offseason is probably the return of Kendrick Bourne.
Okay.
Not so much for what he brings from a statistical perspective, but the positive energy that he continues to put out there on a regular basis in that on the offensive side of the ball.
Okay.
He is just, especially in the context of having two really important young wide receivers in that room in Baker and Polk. He's a pro's pro. He's a guy who takes care of his business, but is also self-aware enough to know that it's a competition, and he is more than likely kind of coaching up the next phase of a lot of these young players, or the next phase in their career. A lot of these young players who are probably gonna end up taking his job in the not too distant future. But he's just the kind of guy you need guys like that on your roster if you're going to win football games. And for what it says about him, again, not from a statistical standpoint, but the measure of respect that he has around the league, where he's willing to come back and be a part of a quote unquote rebuild.
Yeah.
A guy like that, people around the league notice that. And again, I'm not talking about catching 40, 50, 60 balls this year. I'm talking about being the kind of guy who sets the tone for a group of young wide receivers who are part of the next generation. And when free agents will be able to see, Kendrick Bourne had some opportunities to go elsewhere. You re-signed in New England. For guys down the road, for Polk and Baker, it's a big thing to be able to have a guy like that. And you can name any number of other guys who came back, veterans who came back. I think to a large extent, a lot of those guys are kind of, you can classify them the same way. Guys like Hunter Henry or Michael Onwenu. Although Onwenu, obviously a lot of that's tied to the contract, and I can't blame him. But for me, it goes back to Kendrick. His positive energy, his mentality, his approach, his work ethic. It says a lot about a team to make him a free agent priority. And I think the rest of the league recognizes that, and I think it's going to pay dividends down the road.
And your least favorite?
My least favorite free move of the
well, it doesn't have to be a free agency signing. It could be a contract extension. It could be a draft pick. It could be whatever you want it to be.
I think what we said before. I think waiting on a tackle and not landing a tackle. I don't want to put Wallace in. Call Wallace the worst the worst move of the offseason. It's more about an ability to kind of fill in at that position. And maybe
so would you rather take in a tackle where they took Jalen Polk and pushed a receiver back afterwards?
Maybe. Okay. I think they waited too long.
Okay.
Especially in what happened last year, and then in the wake of not being able to land not even an elite left tackle. Let's call it a semi-elite left tackle in free agency.
Sure.
I just think that position has been a real struggle for them. I mean, you guys, I'm not breaking any news here, but I think their inability to make it work at left tackle, I think it's been the most disappointing thing for me this offseason. You can point to some other positions. You can say, well, like you said, they were very clear this offseason on what they wanted to do. Quarterback, wide receiver, tackle. They addressed wide receiver. Maybe they could have done a better job, but I think tackle, especially if you're going to get a young quarterback, I think that the tackle position is so huge these days, but especially in the context of trying to get a young quarterback, I think it's absolutely vital, and I think that's where they fell down on the job.
Okay. Steve, I got one more two-parter question for Chris, but do you have anything that you want to do before I do that?
Well, you go ahead with your question, and then I'll ask.
Okay. All right. So, kind of in the same vein, there's been a lot of changes to the coaching staff. So, where do you feel confident in the coaching staff from a position standpoint, and where are you a little concerned?
I'd build on what I said before. I'm completely confident in the defense.
Okay.
And a lot of it goes back to continuity, having DeMarcus Covington back, having him run that defense, having a guy like Mayo who, made his bones, obviously, both as a player and a coach on the defensive side of the ball. I have no questions about the defense and the defensive coaching staff in particular. I think it's going to be very, very good. I think this defense has a chance to be a top 10 defense. And I think, within the next 2 or 3 years, we might be talking about DeMarcus Covington as a head coaching prospect.
Mm-hmm.
The offensive side of the ball, I have a lot of questions. I'll say this. I just wrote, and this is going to be up probably in the next few days.
Ooh, a little sneak peek. Here we go.
There you go. A little sneak peek. Exactly. I did a deep dive on Alex Van Pelt.
Yep.
And I like Alex a lot. At the same time, offensively, the offensive side of the ball, I don't know. I have no feel for their ability to execute on a consistent basis, both as a group of coaches and as a group of players. I don't know. Like this is going to be the first time that Alex is going to call plays on a consistent basis over the course of a full season. I do think that we're going to get behind the scenes a heavy dose of Ben McAdoo serving as basically an associate head coach, offensive advisor, kind of maybe he's going to be in the headsets on game day telling Gerard, hey, look, you got to take a time out here. You got to manage the clock. You got to be aware of this. You got to be aware of that, particularly in the offensive side of the ball. But I just have no feel for their ability to be able to execute consistently on offense. And I think that trickles down to the coaching staff. Again, I like Alex Van Pelt a lot. I had a chance to talk to him. I think they're headed in the right direction.
Yeah,
I like a lot of the draft picks, but just on offense as a whole, I won't single out Alex as a guy I don't have any faith in, but just offensively, there are a lot of questions, and a lot of them come down to just the relative inexperience. They could come out and put 40 points on the board in the opener, and it all goes poof. But I think that I want to see them do it on a consistent basis first, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it all kind of comes together for them, particularly on the offensive side of the ball.
I totally agree. I think the defensive side of the ball will be interesting. I mean, Covington and Mayo, I've been calling them like disciples of Bill, right? Like they come from the same system, but I'm kind of curious to see, like, I'm sure they're going to have their own twist to something. I kind of feel like they might be a little bit more aggressive, specifically with like the pass rush. Like, so that'll be kind of interesting to see. Obviously, time will tell, right? Offensively, AVP, like you said, has never really called plays on a consistent basis, but he did for a small sample size. Also, has a pretty damn good track record with the rest of the league. Ben McAdoo, who I know was largely mocked by a lot of fans for kind of flaming out as a head coach, he also was pretty widely respected, behind the scenes. I can tell you from a couple people that we've talked to with certainty that Ben McAdoo is very, very highly regarded in that building.
Yes, I agree, Derek, and I think that's a great point, and that's a good thing to get into, because I talk to a lot of people in New York who feel that he got a raw deal. And I think it all goes back to, and not to go too far afield, but it all goes back to the decision to bench Eli, and that wasn't completely his decision. Exactly. And look, I know it's easy to goof on him. It is, with the hair and the giant, play sheet and
the
stuff.
big mustache and all that bullshit.
I get it. And some guys aren't head coaches, and that's okay. But I think he's going to have a heavy imprint on this offense. I do.
Yeah, no, and that's the feeling that I've got just talking with people. I'm nobody. I'm just having conversations, and I feel like they are significantly higher. They're really excited about that hire for Drake May. They think that's a really good spot for him to be. So that'll be curious, but appreciate sharing that insight. Steve.
Yeah, on this same vein, Chris, when you're looking at Alex Van Pelt, does the fact that he was a longtime quarterback in this league, does that help a lot when he's trying to develop Drake May as a rookie?
It does. It does, and I'm glad you asked that. He's a guy who has a lot of cachet with quarterbacks around the league, guys that he's worked with around the league. Baker Mayfield, Aaron Rodgers, just guys. Joe Flacco last year, because
Aaron
he was
Rodgers raved about him.
Yeah,
Baker loves him.
Baker loves him. And I thought for a while that Baker may have that thread may have been enough to kind of pull, Baker in toward Foxborough as a free agent. But look, he's the other thing too is that, and this comes up in every conversation that I have with people around the league, and I wrote this in the story. I'll tell you guys, no one has a bad thing to say about him.
Yeah.
Like there's no unpaid parking tickets. The guy's got a spotless reputation around the league, in a league where, you get offensive coordinators who are half his age. This guy's perfected the long game in my eyes, that he's been able to climb. He's been a grinder. He's been a worker. He's been a guy who has done everything that he needs to do to get to this moment in his coaching career. So I'm optimistic. I don't want to kind of be doom and gloom and say that I don't think the offense is going to be good, but he's got to meet this challenge. I think he's capable of meeting this challenge, but until he does, I don't want to, put the check mark next to his name. But yeah, ultimately, Steve, to answer your question, he's got a great rep. And the fact that he was a player, the fact that he was out there, the fact that he did it for an extended period of time, he was in the league for 11 years. He didn't have wildly impressive numbers, but anyone who was in the league 11 years was doing something right. And I think one of the reasons that he was able to find success in Cleveland with 9 different starting quarterbacks in a 4-year span was because he could identify with every one of those guys who came through the system. Whether, he was a starter, he was a backup, he was a mentor, he was a guy who was cut. He has had a wide breadth of experiences as a player. And I think that's one of the things that allows him to be able to connect with a lot of the guys in the room, like he's done over the course of his career.
Yeah, I read something last weekend where I forget which quarterback it was, said if you look at him, he's a chubby guy. He was a chubby guy when he was a quarterback. He didn't last 11 years because he was athletic. He lasted 11 years because of his mind. And I thought that was a great point to bring up. I'm just, with so many new moving parts, all new coaching staff on the offensive side of the ball, a slew of new players that are coming in. I think it's going to take a little time to gel, but if they can get just a sliver of decent play out of the offense this year, there'll be a pain in the neck to play against.
Yeah, they just need to get something out of the offense. They need to get something.
Literally something.
If they can look, if this offense can average, this may be too over, but if they can average 17 points a game on offense, 14 to 17 points a game, they're going to be competitive. I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs. I'm not saying they're going to be playing important games after Thanksgiving. But look, if you can average 14 points a game with that defense, you should be doing okay. I got a quick story for you. I got a quick Alex Van Pelt story for you that is going to be in the feature that's going to run. He did
love it
radio for a stretch in Buffalo with the legendary John Murphy, the Bills play-by-play guy who just stepped away because he had some medical issues. And they developed a really good relationship, and he became part of the Bills coaching staff after he left the radio booth. And this was on a Sunday night. The Bills had suffered a bad loss, and they're connected. They're still buddies. So he gives him a call, and he says, "Alex, you okay? That was a tough one today." He says, "Yeah, I think I'm okay. The only thing that sucks is I'm at a Crown Royal." So he's one of those guys, man. And I say this in the story. Everyone's got kind of that fun side of AVP, that ability to connect with AVP. He's a good guy. He's the centerpiece. One of the people I talked to said, if he wasn't an offensive coordinator, he wasn't in the NFL, he'd be an events coordinator because he can draw people in. And I think that's one of the things that people really like about him. And I think that's one of the things that's allowed him to be able to continue that climb upward. In a league where all the coveted young coaching minds are out there, the the Waldrons, the 20-something guys, the 30-something guys. He's a guy who's gone about it a little bit of a different way, and I think he's had the time to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work, and I think the Patriots ultimately are going to see that's going to pay dividends for in his time in New England.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great point.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Do you have time? I have three like really quick, like random questions that I end every interview with.
Bring them on.
But can I ask you, do you have time for one more question before we get to that?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your biggest concern? I think we're all on the same page about where the team's going to be this year. I do like the moves they've made. I like the draft position. I think I think the compass is pointing in the right direction. It might take a second to kind of have them build it, to a certain point. What's your biggest concern about the team as it stands right now?
That they won't get the time to kind of let it all play out. This is not going to be, I've used the analogy before. This is like turning around an oil tanker.
Okay.
This is not going to be, they're not going to be in the playoffs this year.
Yep.
They're not going to make the playoffs in 2024.
If they do, Drake May stepped in week 1 and just lit it up, but would just shock me.
Yeah, exactly. Look, it's a climb back. It's a process. I'm not going to try and equate, and I said this on the radio the other day, I'm not going to try and equate Gerard Mayo with Bill Parcells. But this feels like the early 1990s. So if I'm a fan, I have to be able to manage my expectations here a little bit and understand that, look, what I want to see is improvement over the course of the year. I want to see like that 1993 team that won the last 4 games to go like 5-11 and went into the offseason kind of on an up note, trending in the right direction. I want to see Drake May get significant snaps before the end of the year. I want to see Polk can play. I want to see if Baker can play. I want to see the execution on the offensive side of the ball if it's trending in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to be building to a point where you feel good about 2025 and beyond. You say, look, not punt on 2024, but look, this is gonna take a while, and they just need some time to, I think, let it breathe, because we're all so used to, 8 straight years in the AFC Championship game and just duck boat parades and all that. And it was great. It was great. But now we're at the process of figuring out how to build it all back together again. And that's exciting too. It's not going to involve championships, at least in the short term, but to be able to put together a group that kind of figures things out, on their own. I would also be a little bit worried. I don't think this is the case, but I would be a little bit worried about Jonathan Kraft's influence.
Mm-hmm.
But I just, if I'm a Patriots fan, I just want to let it breathe for a couple of years and grow and get to a process where they are competitive again, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, no, I think that's
on that
sense.
vein, Chris. Derek and I talked offline probably 6 times a week.
At least we're
at
like
least
an old
6
married
times
couple.
a week we talk offline, and we were talking about certain things that were reported about OTAs, and then you had a picture of it. Are we overreacting seeing May, Polk, and Baker being the last 3 guys on the field this early in the process? Or is it something that, we can point at and say, they're already trying to come together?
And you can make fun of me, by the way, but I'm like totally like I usually stay pretty neutral. It's Patriots fans, Derek, pants off. I'm like super excited about this whole situation. So you tell me.
He said that in more colorful terms when we spoke on the phone.
It doesn't hurt, man. It doesn't hurt. I joked about this on my podcast with Hogan, that he's like, look, it's great. He said he was something like that. Wasn't that cute? They have all 3 of them walking off the field together. That's absolutely fantastic. Look, it doesn't hurt. Just keep building, and just understand that it's not going to come together because you all hung out and threw after a practice in May.
Sure.
That You know, it's got to build. These sessions are for, you know, November games against the Dolphins, and, you know, building to a point where you trust the guy. The other thing too, if I'm Drake May, and this is, Hogan was talking about this the other day, where if I'm Drake May, I also get the veteran guys out there, and I say, look, help me understand. You know, I know that you're a veteran and you're going through this, but look, help me understand where you want the ball. Help me understand what routes you like to run. Let's get out there. Let's spend 10 minutes after practice and do some of that too. So I can know what you like, where we go, what kind of situations. So don't just limit it to the rookies. And I know that it's a difficult dance to do if you're Drake May, because you want to be deferential, but at the same time you want to show some leadership capabilities. But get everyone on board. Let's create you know how we had the Tom Brady circle of trust? Let's start the Drake May circle of trust. Let's get 4 or 5 guys around him after practice, and he's throwing to 4. Let's have Juju hang around. You know, Bourne can't do anything right now, but have Ramondre. You know, get him in there. You know, and so look, ultimately, I guess my biggest takeaway is some of it's maybe a little performative, but it can't hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, honestly, one of the great things about them drafting Polk and Baker and guys like that, and the guys they have on their team, is like right now they have a lot of guys that will go out and catch the ball, and like Drake May is not Bo Nix. Bo Nix doesn't have like elite arm talent, but he has great ball placement. Drake May is not necessarily that guy. He's going to be throwing it in your direction. You got to go up and get it. Baker and Polk go up and freaking get it. If you watch any of their tape, like they showed that consistently over their college careers. So that's exciting too. But like, yeah, the whole chemistry they're building together, really, really exciting. So for as Mike Felger would say, as footy pajamas, Derek would, you know, Patriots fan, I'm very excited.
Exactly. You take it. Look, man, you take it. It's everything at this time of year. You take it with a grain of salt.
Yep,
you do.
100%. All right, so 3 random questions to wrap up the show. Okay, non-football related. Okay, they're very simple. All right, favorite pizza topping?
Mushroom.
Okay,
yeah.
I like that. Those odds were good. If anyone was betting on that on DraftKings, that was pretty good. Mushroom. Okay, I like that. All right, Chris Price walking into a bar. You can pick the time of day. What are you ordering?
I'm ordering a whale's tail from Cisco.
Ooh, good beer.
I'm a Nantucket guy, man. I am. I'm a Nantucket apologist.
Vodka. You ever do the Cisco Great Ladies, like the blueberry vodka on the whale's tail? That's
I have. If you've ever been, I will shill unapologetically for Cisco. Going to the brewery, whether you head up north to New Hampshire or you go to the seaport, you know, you have a few drinks in the seaport in Boston, or if you're lucky enough to get out to Nantucket, it is just fantastic beer. I love it.
My two favorite beers from Massachusetts are Jack's Abbey and Cisco beers.
And Jack's Abbey is right up the road from us here in Metro West. So this is fantastic. And I want to make an addendum to the pizza topping one.
Okay.
You put buffalo chicken on anything, it makes it instantly 15 to 20% better.
Hell yeah.
One of the great things that I miss about covering the Patriots back in the old days, Papa Gino's every Wednesday.
Yep.
And they would bring in buffalo chicken pizza.
I'm pretty sure Fred Kirsch and Paul Perillo kept them in business for about 20 years.
Just the best. Just the best. And look, I'm no gourmand. I'm a sports writer, but yeah, buffalo chicken pizza from Papa Gino's. Good stuff.
Yeah, I've noticed that all the sports writers, not necessarily the best nutritionists, but we'll get to that.
No, it's the only job, Derek. It's the only job where you look at like a slice of chocolate cake at 1:00 in the morning and go, "That's a good idea." Yes, and look,
anything to cure writer's block. Anything to cure writer's block, Chris. All right?
It's just, it's not a job. If you go into sports writing, you have to be really cognizant of what you eat and when you eat it. So I can tell you a quick story.
Right,
First time my son came to training camp, took him up to the press box. I thought he'd be blown away by the view. Love it. You know, they're way up on top of
just one of the buffet.
And he looked at the soda machine and was just like, wow, you get Pepsi whenever you want.
That's
That's
awesome.
just the best. And I was like, yeah, well, it is pretty cool.
All right, last question for you is favorite vacation spot.
Cape Cod. I gotta go
outside of
Cape
Massachusetts.
Cod.
Come on.
Okay, outside of Massachusetts. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Outside of Massachusetts. I was lucky enough. I've been lucky enough to go to Hawaii twice in my life.
Yep.
And Hawaii is just like you walking into a postcard.
Kauai is literally my favorite place on the planet. It's literally like magical. It's heavenly. It's unreal.
It is. It's like you're walking into a National Geographic special.
Yep.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I guess I'm a Cape Cod guy, specifically in Nantucket, but I've been to Florida. Steve can tell. I've been to Florida, before. I love spending time there. Been down south. I've been lucky enough to go north on a handful of occasions, Maine, Canada, but Hawaii is just like heaven on earth, man.
It really is.
Just the best.
Well, Christopher, I got to thank you for coming on. Sorry for the 3 random questions, but that's been kind of a theme of these interviews we've been doing. So I feel like I have to stay consistent with something.
I love it. I love it.
I don't know if no one really needs to plug you, but do you want to plug anything for yourself on the way out?
Well, I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter, or whatever we're calling it these days. It's C Price Globe.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
C Price Globe. And I have the podcast with Chris Hogan, the Patriots Report on the Believe Network. We do new shows at least one show a week. We're going to take a break here between mid-June and mid-July, the dead period in the NFL calendar. And then you can also read my stuff at Boston Globe and bostonglobe.com.
Awesome, man.
And we got a few good tidbits for his Sunday column.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Well, a little sneak peek action
for that.
That was awesome. Well, Chris, I hope we can have you on maybe sometime in training camp. I'd love to. If you're going to be there, I certainly won't be with what we have coming up. My wife and I coming up, but I would love to get you to come back on. I so much appreciate the time. I want to appreciate I want to say thank you to Christopher for coming online with us, for Steve and I. Patriots 4th and 2. Thank you so much for listening to us this week, and we will see you guys next week.